Can somebody be a good person if they A, don't believe in God, B, believe in something like, I don't know, the moose god or something, like a clearly false? So is it possible for them to be good people?
I had not really dealt with what happens when your ideology or your moral framework, your way of seeing the world, your model, what happens when it runs smack into a reality that can't be subsumed into it?
Yeah.
And that's
a great, so what happens?
Well,
what should happen?
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
Moving us in a good direction.
Dreher, what does it mean to be a good person?
Well, as you know, I am an Eastern Orthodox Christian. So for me, the ultimate measure is living within the will of God as revealed through the Christian scripture and the teachings of the church. But generally speaking, and I think that this is also supported by my religious beliefs, to be a good person is to be compassionate, selfless, disciplined, and to always try to stand up for the weak when you can. It's not to say that the victim or the weak is always right, but you should have a heart that wants to help those who are really struggling. But I think goodness also requires a certain amount of prudence. You know, I think it's in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas and others talked about how we balance the virtues with prudence. It does not make you good to be compassionate to when your compassion destroys things. For example, here in Europe, where we are now, the last Pope, Pope Francis, and I think the new Pope has repeated this, has talked about the need to be compassionate to the stranger. Now, they're talking about immigrants. Well, that is a Christian virtue, and I think it's a Jewish virtue. It's in the scripture, and I think it's something that many of us can recognize as a good thing, to be kind to the stranger. On the other hand, here in Europe, that virtue taken to an extreme has become a vice. That's
excesses,
it's destroying these societies. So prudence is also has to be there to govern our goodness, to help us know when to apply different virtues. But in the end, Peter, I think that it all comes down to love, the love of God and love of neighbor. And if you don't believe in God or love God, you can still love your neighbor. Jesus Christ said that is the whole of the law, to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself.
So I want to pick up on some things you've said. I was a little bit surprised to hear you say discipline, because I too think that is, one can be unjust toward oneself if one is not sufficiently disciplined. But I realize that that idea is out of vogue. So before I go on to the prudence thing, which I think is really important, tell me why you think, can you be a good person without being disciplined?
I think from a God's eye view, yeah, you could be, but your goodness will be dissipated, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure you can be, but go ahead,
Yeah, but I think, I'm not going to say that somebody who's a complete hot mess, as I tend to be sometimes, can't be good. But I think that all our best intentions can be dissipated in chaos and disorganization if we don't have some sense of discipline. Now, I wouldn't say that discipline is itself a necessary virtue, but it is a skill, a habit that's required to make goodness effective.
So it's not necessary, so you can be good without being disciplined.
Yeah, I think you can, but your goodness, the effect of your goodness will be much less in the world. I mean, it's like a river, right?
Yeah.
If a river is channeled beneath high banks, it has certain force. But if it spreads out into a delta, it becomes stagnant. I think we can think of the virtues in the same way.
Interesting, yeah, okay. Yeah, I guess, and I don't want to linger on discipline too much, but I guess if you lived an incredibly simple life without a lot of variables, discipline wouldn't matter that as much. But if your life, you're interfacing with more people, you're doing more things that, so I personally think it is a necessary but not sufficient condition for goodness. But I want to pick up on the prudence thing. Talk to me about that, because I find that fascinating. So I find maybe it's just because I'm culturally Christian that I find the similarities, but talk to me a little more about prudence.
Well, if I remember correctly from my philosophy minor as an undergraduate, the medievals called prudence the queen of the virtues because it is what governed all the other virtues. In other words, it helped you know when to apply them and how to apply them. In fact, compassion applied too liberally can be a vice, as I talked about earlier. In fact, René Girard, the great anthropologist, literary theorist of the late 20th and early 21st century, he said that something laudable that came out of Christian culture, the exaltation of the victim, had risked becoming so extreme that it was bringing about a totalitarian chain of command or a command society. What he was seeing was the beginnings of wokeness. He said that in the year 2000. So prudence would have, if we had been able to apply it then, it would have said, yes, always look out for the weak and the oppressed and those who are victimized, but don't exalt them. Don't make them an end in themselves. In a similar way, sometimes I think you have to go to war, but humans being what they are. But if you push too far on that, or you push too far on policing society, you get a police state. So prudence helps us try to discern which virtues need to be applied and in what measure in a particular situation. Because there's not a rule book that tells you do this at every time. It requires judgment.
I wish more people would talk in terms of virtues. I love speaking about virtues, but it's people think it's an outdated term. When you hear virtues, what do you think? Like, what does that mean to you?
Hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.
When I was younger, I used to think of it was like the church lady, lecturing you, shaking her finger at you. But as I got older and did reading, and came to understand that in the long Western tradition, going back to the classical era and the Middle Ages, the virtues were principles and ways of living that we needed to learn how to live well in society together. And these were important. The search for virtue, what are the virtues? How can we live them out? This was something that all intelligent people and moral people thought about for a very long time.
So then the question becomes, person A has their principles, person B has their principles. How do they adjudicate if those principles are incommensurable?
This is, I think, one of the biggest and deepest problems we live with today.
I completely agree. That's why I asked you.
No, well,
it'd be perfect to ask you.
And no, I'm glad you asked me because it's a problem I've been thinking about more in certain ways for much of my career. In 1982, the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre, who died recently at the age of 96, I think, in 82, he wrote an important book of moral philosophy called After Virtue. Yeah. What did he mean by that? Well, he meant that in the West, the traditions that we have been living under for so long, a virtue tradition that had been derived from Greek philosophy and Christian scripture, Judeo-Christian scripture, it had become exhausted. MacIntyre said that the Enlightenment tried to replace it with reason as a sufficient means to talk about virtue and to arrive at goodness and in a binding way, a way that everybody could recognize this is the source of authority on which our discussions are based. Even as late as the 1960s, there was still, even though we were a de-Christianizing civilization, there was enough Christianity left over so that the civil rights leaders in the U.S., they were all black pastors, right? And they spoke, Martin Luther King and the others spoke in the language of the Bible and appealed to people's memory, at least, whether they were Christians or not. Even atheists and agnostics understood the Bible as the ultimate source of authority, even if they didn't take it seriously as divine command. Tom Holland, the historian Tom Holland, has talked about this in his book Dominion, how setting out to write about how Christianity changed the West made him realize that all of the things he most valued as a secular humanist ultimately derived from Christianity. Well, MacIntyre said in the 80s, that is gone now. That has exhausted itself. And this is why all of our public disputes never seem to get resolved. We just yell past each other because we're reasoning from very different moral presuppositions. MacIntyre said in that book that we can either choose between Aristotle or Nietzsche, by which he meant we can come up with a secular way, as the philosopher Aristotle did, of reasoning through our to what virtue is and how it should bind us. Or if we don't do that, then all we're left is Nietzsche and will to power. Well, MacIntyre later converted to Catholicism, but I don't think it solved the question. You can say Aristotle, Nietzsche, or Christ, but how should you make the choice between or among those three? I don't think we know.
Can somebody be a good person if they, A, don't believe in God, B, believe in something like, I don't know, the moose god or something, like a clearly false, or, you know, the book of Urantia or something? So is it possible for them to be good people?
We would first have to come up with a definition of how to measure goodness. And I don't see how we can do that without some reference to a transcendent source in which we ground that goodness. Otherwise, it's all relativism. So I would say that a follower of the Urantia book or the moose god, if they are...
I just made that up. I don't even know if there is a moose god. Yeah.
If they are good by my way of judging, insofar as their moral conduct and their disposition correlates with what we know goodness is from the Christian tradition. Now,
but that's question begging, because the hypothetical or moose worshiper would say, well, if it's in the book of the moose.
Exactly. Oh, I know. Look, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying that why MacIntyre had such an effect on me, because I think this is something that a lot of normie liberals and conservatives today don't really appreciate, how much of what we think of as just obviously true about morality is not obvious at all. Tom Holland in Dominion talks about, he's first a historian of the Greco-Roman era. He said it was not at all obvious to the Greeks and the Romans that what we call human rights, that we believe are universal and are part of human dignity, those didn't exist. What are human rights? And I guess what I'm getting at is I find it impossible to imagine how we can have a binding sense of goodness. When I say binding, I mean we can arrive at the definition that this is good and this is bad, and also have it bind the conduct of people, unless we have a transcendent source that we agree on is the source of our reason.
Yeah, and that's the problem, that we agree on is the problem there.
Yeah.
And so...
we don't always agree within Christianity. You have so many different... Yeah. So I think we are because of this, we are in an age of great fragmentation, a great fluidity. The Polish sociologist Zygmunt Bauman described the era we live in now as liquid modernity, by which he meant that...
I hadn't heard that. That's
have you not heard of it? Oh,
no.
It's fascinating. Bauman was a Marxist, but Marxists can sometimes have a lot of insight into how things really are. The prescriptions, but Bauman said that at the beginning of the modern era, the progress in science and academics and intellectual world and in economics, it began speeding up culture. And as culture changed and as society changed, things would begin to change so quickly that before people could get used to the new way of living, it was changing again. And it finally got so fast that nothing could be solid anymore, that things were changing too fast for anything to be solid. Therefore, said Bauman, and I think this is such a great way to think about where we are today. He said, in ages past, people lived their lives as if they were pilgrims. Now, he's not talking about whether they were religious or not.
Yeah.
What does a pilgrim do? A pilgrim sets out on a set journey, following a familiar path with other people. They stop at familiar landmarks, and they're all going to the same place. That linear way of seeing life was how most people lived. You had your childhood, your education, you got married, you had kids, you worked, you retired, you died. That was life. In liquid modernity, says Bauman, we are not pilgrims, but tourists, where there is no set path for you to follow. You can flit from here to there like a tourist going only in the direction your desires tell you to. Now, that can be fun, but there's ultimately no meaning to
I was literally just going to say that. So on that frame and that rendering, that's why we have the crisis of meaning. No?
Yeah. And it occurred to me recently, Bauman all over again, because I was sent to France to write about a 3-day pilgrimage that takes place every year from
for the
Paris
Free
to Chartres.
Press.
Yeah, for the Free Press. From Paris to Chartres. Chartres is a medieval pilgrimage town about an hour's drive outside of Paris. Every year around the Christian feast of Pentecost, that weekend, 20,000 young Catholics, mostly French, but some from all over the world, especially Europe, they gather to walk, spend 3 days walking and praying and singing hymns and camping together from Paris to Chartres. And I went there to stand in the crowd with them. It's outside of Saint-Sulpice Church in central Paris, interviewed them about why are you here? What do you expect to get out of this, et cetera. And then I joined them at the very end at the Cathedral of Chartres and talked to them about what their experience.
Real quick, before we go on, just so that it can help me understand, what was the average age?
People were like from about 14 to 27, I would say. Mostly in the middle, they're teenage, college age.
Younger, and were they natives of where?
Most of them French, but I would say probably about 10% of them were from other European countries, and there were a few Americans there too, and a few Mexicans.
And what did you find from that?
It's so fascinating. I don't know if you've even heard of the traditionalist Catholics. They're Catholics who love the Latin Mass. All of these kids love the Latin Mass.
I can't fathom such a thing, but okay.
Yeah, but I had experience of traditionalists in the U.S. I used to be a Catholic. And some of them are wonderful people, but there tends to be a lot of bitterness in those communities. These kids, no bitterness at all. They seemed so happy and so normal. It was extraordinary. But I would talk to them about, why are you here? Well, the general message I got from them was, we grew up in a society that had no truth, where they told us, do what you want to do, be whoever you want to be. But they didn't tell us what we should or how we should make that choice. So these kids were filled with anxiety about how to live. And they also felt radically atomized. And I began to see, the more I talked to them, both at the beginning of the pilgrimage and at the end, is that these kids, this was their answer to the meaning crisis. This literal pilgrimage, this 3-day walk from one place to the other, was in a metaphorical sense what they wanted from life. They wanted a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, like this is what I have to do with my life. And they wanted a sense of community. We're all doing it together. And I remember talking to this one American kid, Nicholas McDonald from Kansas City, 25 years old, at the end of the pilgrimage. He said, what I got out of this, the thing that meant the most to me was when we would camp at night, I couldn't speak the language of any of these people, but we were all Catholic and we all had that in common, and somehow we got along, and it just made me feel like I was part of something so much greater. It's also the case that with the Latin Mass, these kids say that they felt that they were connected to a much deeper tradition and going much broader back in history and deep into their roots. What also fascinated me about them, Peter, is a lot of these kids said they came to this form of Christianity, or to Christianity itself, during COVID. They were stuck in their houses. They had nothing to do but watch video, and they started listening to people talk about Christianity, Catholicism, and especially the Latin Mass. And that's what brought them out there. What really got to me, listen to these happy, normal, cheerful kids talk about this, was I had just done a piece for the Free Press about how some young men in America spent that same time getting red-pilled to white nationalism, anti-Semitism, and extremism. These kids started in the same place, but went to something a lot more wholesome and happy.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me what you said, meaning, purpose, and community. And that's what I think a lot of the people who follow, and I'm glad you mentioned that about anti-Semitism, I call it Jew hatred. I see people, the rise of the Tate brothers, Andrew Tate in particular, just deeply revolting to me. What I see disturbs me, and I guess it kind of gets back to our original question. How do you know what to seek meaning, purpose, and community in? Like, for a while, it was a thing where people sought those things in joining ISIS. And I'm sure they got those things.
Yep.
So that's why...
Totalitarianism. That's what it is.
Yeah, totally, yeah. And so that's why I think one's epistemology has to precede everything. Like, how do you know what you know, and how do you know what you should seek out?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I wrote a book called Live Not by Lies.
It's an awesome book.
Thank you.
Truly.
About wokeness as a softer form of totalitarianism. And one of the things I found out when I was researching the book, Hannah Arendt wrote in her 1951 book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. She wrote about why Germany and Russia both succumbed to different forms of totalitarianism. And she said totalitarianism appeals to people who are alienated, they feel lonely, they've lost a sense of purpose, they've lost faith in the authorities around them, and they've lost a sense of community.
Yeah, that's the modern age.
That's the modern age,
we see
right?
Around us all the time.
Right. And so it helped me understand why certain people are drawn to wokeness. And I think also why certain people are drawn to these very dark, far-right conspiracy theories, things like that.
Okay, so tell me this. I understand the first half, but tell me, like, I'm struggling with why someone would be drawn to Tate.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a child rapist.
He's a disgusting man who ought to be in jail. I agree, but I'm trying, because so many of these young men are. I mean, it's something that, I'm 58, right?
Yeah, I'm 58 too. What are they drawn to?
I think what they're drawn to, first of all, is he stands up to everything they've been taught by mainstream liberal society, especially in schools, that is good. He stands up and gives it the finger, right? And I think a lot of young men appreciate that because they've been raised in a culture, broadly speaking, that has been very feminized, that it demonizes ordinary masculinity. It doesn't need to be demonized. It needs to be formed and shaped and disciplined, but not demonized. And I think that they appreciate the FU quality of Andrew Tate.
Like Trump, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense. And so I think that's probably his outrage is attractive. But Hannah Arendt, again, she talked about how in the pre-totalitarian societies of Russia and Germany, people were drawn to those who liked to transgress for the sake of transgression because they thought it was fun. And she said, she had a great line that goes something like, people were willing to tear down the pillars of their society simply for the fun of seeing people who have been kept out for so long rush in. I kind of think that's what's happening with Andrew Tate. And young men are drawn to him because he's so outrageous and performative. And they love seeing how he and Tate ticks off their teachers and the feminists and so on.
Yeah, I know what I was going to ask you about. So I just saw a picture with him, with that woman. I don't know, you probably don't follow it, but there's this like woman in Britain.
Bonnie Blue. Yeah.
Is that her name? Yeah. Who sleeps with like, truly something crazy. Don't get to it. The cameraman's getting very excited, but like 100 women a day.
100 men a day.
100 men a day.
I think she went with 1,000 in one go.
Something like that.
It's insane.
Okay, so what do you do you have a comment on that? Because
yeah.
I have a few things to think about that. What do you think about that?
I mean, things are accelerating so fast that, I mean, look, 25 years ago, if you had said that we would be in this place where women could get famous for sleeping with 1,000 men and promoting that.
100 a night or something.
Yeah. And creeps like Andrew Tate would be celebrated as a real leader of men.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, people wouldn't have believed it, but here we are. I think that, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I took an idea from Alistair McIntyre's After Virtue and called it the Benedict option. Which is, I wrote a book about it. And it's, McIntyre says at the very end of After Virtue, he said that basically we live in Babylon. And remember, McIntyre was not a Christian then. He was in fact a Marxist, but he had just lost all faith in society. He said, we are living in a time like the fall of the Western Roman Empire, in which men of goodwill withdrew from society and tried to form communities within which the virtues could be lived throughout the coming dark age. We are now living in such a time, said MacIntyre. What people await now is a new and doubtless very different St. Benedict. Well, St. Benedict, Benedict of Nursia, who left Rome, the city of Rome, which was under barbarian rule around the year 500, went out to the woods to try to figure out, all right, what should I do? I want to live out the virtues. I can't do it here. What should I do? And he founded the Benedictine monastic movement. Well, fast forward to the 21st century, and I'm thinking, we're not all going to the monastery. I don't think we're called to it. Nobody's going to do it. But what can we, ordinary people living in the world, learn from what those monks did? Because over the next few centuries after Benedict lived, the monastic movement grew, and these small communities they built throughout Western Europe slowly re-civilized Europe, in part through education. But it was these monks living in strong community under religious discipline who shared what they learned with the people around them, and gradually Europe re-civilized. I'm thinking that if MacIntyre is right, and I think he probably is, the best thing we can do now, and not just Christians, but everybody, is find communities of virtue to live in, commit to them, small communities, and rebuild, and or at least preserve.
That whole idea of a community of virtue, I think, is so important. Let me throw this out to you and tell me what you think. Don't those communities of virtue have to be predicated upon something that's real?
Yeah. Or at least a shared agreement that there is something real.
Okay, so those are two different things. So that I for sure agree with you. The problem is that many people, like I'm thinking of gender studies departments, they're predicated upon something that's completely, I mean, not even illusory, but demonstrably false. Right. And so, and again, I'm thinking through this. This is an idea that I've had for a long time. You tell me what you think of it. The further away an idea is from reality, if a community tries to base it on that, those bonds will ultimately be illusory.
Sure.
So it has to be based upon something that's real, and not just because of an agreement that it's real, but actually real.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it has to be intrinsically self-correcting. Otherwise, you get cults, Christian cults or any other kind of cult. And this is why so many utopian communities fail. And I got it when the Benedict option came out in 2017. I got a lot of criticism from people who were basing it on, saying utopian communities always fail. I said, look, I could not be part of a utopian community, but we can't make the perfect or the ideal the enemy of the good enough for right now. And I tell a story in the book about this Catholic community of families I met down in Italy in a place called San Benedetto del Tronto. They're all traditionalist Catholics, but they're happy people. They're not smothery. They're not super controlling. They're open to the world. They're like, if you want to come be part of it, we'd love to have you here, but there are certain things you have to do to be part of this community. And I've been down there to see them 2 or 3 times, and they just strike me as so normal. They have a school, a classical Christian school, which is a form of a Christian education that emphasizes the Greek and Roman classics all the way through the Middle Ages and the great books, right? It's called the Scuola G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, interesting.
And but they're giving these kids a real education because they don't really trust what the state schools are doing. But the thing I want to emphasize is these are happy, normal people. If you think from the outside that they must be some sort of conspiratorial, puritanical, that's not them.
Okay, so let me throw this out to you, and I'm thinking aloud as I say this. So when one commits to something that's real, and by that I mean there's some kind of corrective mechanism in it, I'll show all my cards. I think that cultivates some kind of a virtue in somebody. And when one commits to something that is not real, like a fantasy-based martial arts or something, that is almost the opposite of a virtue. And what has to happen in those circumstances is that one has to pretend that the thing is real or be like totally delusional. That's what why we wrote The Conceptual Penis as a paper, because it was just so ridiculous. But I think that committing to something like that can help make one a good person.
Yeah, because material reality imposes limits on us. And limits are what sharpens us and deepens us. It could destroy us. If you come hard against a limit and you don't know how to deal with that, it could destroy you. But most wise people, when they run up against limits, they learn from them. They learn that, maybe, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. And the thing is, we cannot protect people from that. Like, the idea shouldn't be to make the government, that's how we learn to navigate reality, when we figure out what we can and cannot do, and we figure out what we should and should not do. And the should and should not, that's why I think that idea of discipline is so important, because you need to superimpose. I don't know if it's possible to be good or decent or virtuous without discipline.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example about how the real affected me, and it shattered me for a while. I was raised Protestant, but like Easter and Christmas, we weren't really religious. I became a Catholic in my mid-20s, and I was a very committed Catholic, but a very intellectual Catholic. And I had a head full of syllogisms and ideas and doctrines, that sort of thing. And then as a journalist, a few years after being a Catholic, as a journalist, I started writing about the abuse scandal, sex abuse scandal.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that as long as I had all of the arguments for the Catholic faith clear in my head, I'd be fine. And it wasn't true. I ended up going into really dark places, the things I kept learning by investigating this. And eventually I could no longer believe the claims of the Catholic Church. It was the inner torment I had over trying to hold on to what I believed in my head to be true, to reconcile it with what I was seeing and living out. And it was like I dropped my faith, like trying to hold on to a hot iron skillet over a fire. Now, I had friends who were Catholics who were every bit as angry as I was about the scandal, but they didn't lose their faith. And they didn't lose their faith because they lacked the sort of pristine idealism that I had when I came into the church.
So that's so interesting to me, because I've always thought that it's not just that being good means doing good, but in a sense, that's a very Catholic notion of deeds. Like, you need deeds. That's what separates. It's not just belief alone, as a Protestant idea. So it's very interesting that those Catholics still held their belief, even though they saw the abomination that.
But Peter, what I think was what I learned from them, and I became Eastern Orthodox, but I was a very different kind of Christian as an Orthodox Christian. I had been so intellectually arrogant as a Catholic, and I don't blame the Catholic Church for that. That was on me, because I thought, look, we've got all the smart people, or all the smart Christians are Catholics, blah, blah, blah. But I had not really dealt with what happens when your ideology or your moral framework, your way of seeing the world, your model, what happens when it runs smack into a reality that can't be subsumed into it?
Yeah.
And that's
a great. So what happens? Well, let me. What should happen?
Well, what should not happen is the denial that so many Catholics fell into. And it's not just a Catholic thing. It can all be that way.
Yeah, I mean, even if you took it out of Catholics, if your model of reality runs smack into something that is, so you got to be careful. If the model that you have contradicts the overwhelming body of evidence that a sincere inquirer has sought, it must mean that something is wrong with your model.
Yeah.
I mean, because in science, that's what you do. You just jettison the model.
Yeah. Well, this is how I reconciled it. I could have lost my faith entirely, but I had already learned and experienced so much, not just in my head, but in my actual mystical experience and things like that, where I believed that Jesus was real. So what do? I started thinking about Eastern Orthodoxy, and I read all the arguments for Orthodoxy, doctrinal stuff versus Catholicism. I couldn't sort it out. One day, I prayed and said, God, I can't hold on to you as a Catholic. I want you, though, and I'm going to leave the Catholic Church and become Orthodox in pursuit of truth, in pursuit of you, because as a Christian, and this is an important concept, the truth is not just a proposition. The truth is an incarnate God-man, Jesus Christ. So I want to know you, Jesus. If I can't do it as a Catholic because of my own brokenness, because of the brokenness of the church in this time and place, then I'm going to Orthodoxy. If I'm making a mistake here, please forgive me. I'm doing it because I'm looking for truth. And I never looked back. But as I said, when I became an
Did you get answered? Did he answer you?
No, I didn't get an answer from on high, but I was able to live with myself then. And when we became Orthodox, once I no longer felt responsible.
Who's we?
Me and my then wife and my children.
Okay.
We became Orthodox. Just the sense of relief from not having to defend what I couldn't defend anymore. My Catholic beliefs was overwhelming.
Because of the abuse scandal.
Because of the abuse scandal. But as I said, I was a very different sort of Christian because as an Orthodox, because as a Catholic, I was so triumphalist and so intellectual. As an Orthodox, I said, I can't allow that to happen. I can't use my faith to beat people up intellectually. I just want to learn how to be as humble as I can, to pray more, to learn how to be a more compassionate and merciful person. And I've been Orthodox now for almost 20 years, and I think it's helped me. I don't know, only God can judge me, but just that idea that religion was more of a way of life and more a matter of the heart and purifying the heart to become more loving and humble.
Okay, so it's interesting to me. So those loving, humble, humility, those are internal characteristics. Did any external characteristics manifest as a consequence of was conversion the right word?
Yeah, it was a conversion.
Did that manifest itself externally in your relationships and the way you treated people and did it have a deeds in the world?
Sure. Oh, there has to be deeds in the Orthodox tradition, as in the Catholic traditions. Faith without works is dead. And I noticed that the way Orthodox think of it is every day is an ongoing conversion, right? To become even better if you're doing it right, repenting from your sins. I noticed over time I became less judgmental of people. And look, Peter, this also came about because I went through serious personal crises. My younger sister died.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry, Rod.
Well, yeah, it's 2011.
Sorry.
My wife and kids and I moved to small town Louisiana to look after my mom and dad. And we got down there, everything fell apart because they could not accept. Their model wasn't religious, but their model was, we live here in this traditional community. Our family's been there 5 generations. My sister had done everything right. I was the bad boy. I left home. Now, I'd succeeded, but I wasn't supposed to succeed in the world. I was supposed to fail in the world and realize that my place was right there at home in the village. My sister stayed in the village, and she had done well too. She taught in a local school, married her high school sweetheart, raised kids, but she got cancer and died.
Oh, geez.
And my family, I realize now in retrospect, they couldn't accept that. And the fact that I moved home, I think that they would never have admitted it, but I think that the fact that I was still alive and prospering, though I had violated the model they had, they couldn't deal with that. They rejected me and my wife and kids, and I felt chronically ill.
Even though you moved home to help them?
Yeah. And
and then you fell chronically ill.
Yeah, I had mononucleosis for 3 years, and the doctors, there was nothing they could do for it. They said it was all stress related. Well, because of that, my marriage broke up. The whole family after my dad died broke up, and it was really
I'm
hard.
truly sorry. Yeah.
Well, thank you, but I learned something. I learned a lot about mercy. I learned living through the 10 years of agony as my marriage was being torn apart by all this. I had a lot more mercy for people because I learned that you can never really know what's going on inside a marriage. My ex-wife and I, we maintained a great facade for the outside world, and we never fought in front of our kids. We didn't want them to feel insecure. But 10 years we lived like this. And
that must have been hell.
It was hard. And I don't say that, I'm sure my ex-wife would have her own story here. The point, though, is that this was a time of refinement for me it made me go much deeper into my faith, into what it meant to suffer. And I learned the value as a Christian, but just as a human being, the value of suffering and the value, therefore, of being compassionate to those who suffer. When I was younger, it was only abstract. Boy, was this concrete. So now I've been divorced for 3 or 4 years now. I get emails from people, Christians, because I'm known as like a conservative Christian public intellectual. Strangers will write me, men, always men, say like, hey, here's what's going on with me. They find themselves, they're conservatives, they believe in family and marriage, they're Christians, but it's all fallen apart, just like me. They just want somebody to talk to. And I try to help them. So I would never want anybody, I'd never want anybody to go through what I went through, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And if it's not divorce, it's something bad.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this notion. So the suffering that you experienced, that was in a sense real. Usually we think of suffering as an internal state, but it's also has an external cause. So it was the dissolution of the marriage. I mean, I don't want to get, I don't need the details, but I assume nobody, you were unhappy. There was probably fighting. There was, struggles and difficulty. And that manifested and that caused the suffering in you. So the suffering in you,
It was depression. It was.
yeah, that was caused by something real, external to yourself.
Absolutely.
And so the way that you dealt with that, and if I'm off base, let me know. You would need a kind of discipline to deal with that. Because some people would take that and they would just hurt other people, or they would do, terrible things to themselves, self-harm.
Alcoholism, drug abuse.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's the other.
Adultery, affairs.
So you experienced, I'm trying to link the idea of you had some substratum, some base upon which that suffering was intelligible and came out as a meaningful, so talk me through that.
It was my Christian faith. As a Christian, and as an Orthodox Christian in particular, I knew that there's no getting around suffering. It's the human condition. But in the Christian faith, God himself, the incarnate God, chose to suffer shame and physical abuse and murder for the salvation of the world. And so he gave suffering ultimate meaning. So what Catholics have this statement like, join your sufferings to the sufferings of Christ.
Yeah.
And what that means is make an imaginative leap and to say, if even God himself had to suffer, what makes you think that it's not going to happen to you? But if you start to see your suffering as in some sense redemptive, as in some sense purifying your heart, then it can be redeemed.
Okay, so this is important. So, Rod, you had mentioned Nietzsche before, and Nietzsche talks about suffering in this way that there is no meaning in your suffering, you're just suffering, and you bringing a lens upon that. So it's like, my knee is killing me constantly. I really haven't slept well in a month. I don't think that there's no question that I'm suffering because of my knee. And then you can't get pain medication here in Hungary.
Tell me about it.
They don't give you pain medication. And I really have not had a good night's sleep in actually maybe almost 6 weeks now. But I often wonder about this idea of enduring suffering, making one a better person. Because I can clearly think of examples where that's the case. And then I can clearly think of examples when that's not the case. So is the lens that you have for that, is it always a good thing? So, okay, so now I'm thinking out through this aloud. If someone suffers, if one has the right tools to deal with suffering, then the fact that they suffered, they can actually turn that into something, I don't know, redemptive might be the right word, but positive.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't seek suffering out for its own sake, but you don't have to look for it. It's going to come to you.
For sure. That's totally true.
Whether you're rich, poor, middle, it doesn't matter. It's coming. As a Christian, my faith taught me not to fear this suffering, but to try to hold on and be virtuous and to still try to love throughout it. and to see it as a form of purification. If I was doing it right, so to speak, it would make me more compassionate to other people who suffer.
Huh.
And I think it
interesting.
did, but in the middle of it, I hated it. I mean, I remember one summer, it was so intense and awful. I would go lock myself in the walk-in closet in my bedroom. I put a mattress in there and would just lie there and try to sleep and pray and sometimes cry in the middle of the day. Grown man, 55 years old.
Because of the marriage.
Yeah. Because I couldn't make it stop. I mean, I'm not going to get into what all was happening, and I couldn't be I wanted so badly to protect my kids from divorce that I said, I've got to play the man here and just deal with it.
So let me ask you a question. I don't know how to ask this without this seeming really weird, but like, so the lens that the outcome of your suffering was that you became more compassionate to other people. Is it possible, you never go to the ophthalmologist, they have that thing and then they switch all the lenses. Is it possible that, like, if there was another lens that was clicked in there and it wouldn't be compassion, it would be something else, that one could grow into thinking that every time they suffered, like, this should be a natural consequence of that?
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, like, what if someone says every time they suffer, they're like, the whole Buddhist notion, life is suffering, so screw everybody. I'm going to make sure, Nietzsche says that. Now you put Nietzsche in my head.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he says that the greatest reward of a slave is to kind of discharge their urges on another slave. So is it possible that instead of compassion being something that somebody would take from suffering, I would say that's a very healthy thing if one is going to take something at all. Is it possible that one could be born in a different cultural context and have a different lens inserted? And so instead of compassion, they have like, well, humanity sucks, I'm going to kill everybody. I mean, just some other...
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is the difference that Christian faith makes. The model we Christians have is Jesus Christ, who, in our belief, chose suffering, chose not to resist, chose to bear it for a higher purpose, the purpose of redeeming humanity. Now, one isn't a Christian, one that doesn't make sense, but we believe that really happened. And subsequently, you see the stories in Scripture of St. Paul, who was beaten and tortured for his faith, the stories of the martyrs, all the way up to the present day. I talked to people for Live Not by Lies, who had people in the Soviet bloc.
Those were great stories.
Yeah, gone to prison, and their faith got them through it. And their faith kept them, not only kept them strong, but kept them from surrendering to hatred. I know people from my own past who were made to suffer unjustly, but the sense of anger overtook them and destroyed them, even at the end of their lives. And I couldn't let that happen to me. But it was, for me, when I was going through this whole 10 years of sickness and then divorce, the marriage breaking apart, I had to constantly go to confession. It's a regular part of life as an Orthodox Christian. Confession, prayer, and reflecting on my own conscience. It hurt. It hurt like hell. And probably my ex-wife was going through this too.
You said she was Orthodox.
Yeah. But I knew my responsibility was to not surrender to hatred and to try to hold it together. And I'll tell you, you know this guy, Alain Finkielkraut?
Yes, I don't know him.
Yeah. He's really interesting French philosopher, Jewish, baby boomer, secular atheist, a small R Republican, believes in the values of the Republic. He is seeing it all fall apart in France now under Islamization, under
everybody is
decadence. Well, I'm a real admirer of his. And so a few years ago, I was in Paris, we got coffee. We were both talking about how we admire the novels of Michel Houellebecq, because Houellebecq really does have a prophetic eye for this decadence around us. So I said to Finkielkraut at the end of our conversation, Professor, where do you find hope? He said, I have no hope, just matter of fact. I said, well, I do have hope, and my hope is in Jesus Christ. But please don't think I'm saying that to you like some shallow American TV evangelist. I believe that life is tragic. I'm very pessimistic about the near-term future. But Christian hope is not optimism, I explained. Christian hope is believing that however much we have to suffer, if we suffer well, if we try to unite our suffering to Christ and love and trust and do what we can to help others who are suffering, that God in some sense sees it and will redeem it, even if we don't live to see it. Well, Finkelkraut listened to me attentively and respectfully. He said, well, that's good for you Americans, but here in France, we don't believe in God. And that was the end of that. But I think about him a lot, though. And if I were him and I didn't have any higher belief, and Peter, recently after Chartres, I went with an American journalist friend, a man who doesn't have faith. We went down to Rocamadour. Rocamadour was a medieval pilgrimage site in France, hugely famous in the Middle Ages. It's in the middle of nowhere, this little village built on the side of a cliff. And they have a statue of the Virgin and Child that the medieval pilgrims thought was a miracle.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen. Okay.
Probably heard of this.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen pictures of it. Yeah.
This is why we went. In Michel Houellebecq's great novel Submission from 2015, the climax of this story takes place in Rocamadour. In the novel, this dissolute Sorbonne professor, Francois, he can see that France is rapidly becoming a Muslim country. And he doesn't have any belief in anything higher. He just likes to drink and eat well and get laid. But he's been offered...
Like Travis.
He's been offered by the incoming regime that, look, if you'll convert to Islam, we don't really care what you believe, but if you make a profession of the Muslim faith, we'll give you a good, secure job in the Sorbonne and 3 wives. And
oh my God, I'd already say no.
But he's thinking about it
because
he's just such a sort of casual nihilist. But he ends up going on a vacation while he's thinking about it. He meets a guy at the campground who says, hey, you ought to go to Rocamadour. It's close by. You can really see the power of medieval Christian civilization there. So Francois goes. He gets into the little church and he has a mystical experience. He begins to see like the Virgin rise or something happens. But he catches himself and says, it must be something I ate. He walks out, goes back to Paris, converts to Islam. It's a completely cynical conversion, right? But it's his spiritual death. If he had really believed in Islam, that would have been a different story.
True,
but he just makes this peace so he can have continue a secure middle-class life. And nobody really cares in power whether he believes in the faith or not. It's a spiritual death. That scene means a lot to me because we could all be at that point at some point in our lives when we feel that the veil has been lifted, that we get to see some ultimate reality, whether it's in a chapel or in nature somewhere. How do we respond to it? And do we have the courage to follow that? Or do we tell ourselves this has to be a deception? And why did we make that decision? There's a story I tell in my book, Living in Wonder, a true story about Tobias Wolff, the novelist. It's a story he tells on himself. When he was in his 20s, he was a lapsed Catholic, but enough of a Catholic to want to go spend his summer working at Lourdes, the famous site in southwestern France where people go and take the waters in hopes of a miracle cure of their sickness. And he had really bad eyesight then, but he was 27 years old and he was too vain to wear glasses. He tells a story about how he was one day, his job was to take a paraplegic child, quadriplegic Italian child, take her into the waters, then accompany her back to the chartered plane that these sick pilgrims from Italy had rented to come to Lourdes. And he was sitting there with her on the tarmac. It was late August. It was hot as blazes, and he was fighting hard to dab the sweat off of her and keep the insects off of her. He turns around and sees they've loaded everybody on the plane and shut the door, but there she is. He says he ran over and started pounding on the door saying, "Open up, she's here." He said, "I was sobbing uncontrollably, but I was sweating so much people couldn't really tell." The door opens, they get the little girl on, and off the plane goes. On the bus ride back to the dorm at Lourdes, Tobias Wolff realized, oh my God, I can see. His vision had been perfectly healed by his tears of mercy for that child. He said, I felt an overwhelming urge to go to the grotto at Lourdes to pray, just to say, thank you, God. He gets to the dorm, runs and tells an Irish buddy what's happened. They start drinking beer. He never goes to the grotto. The next morning, he wakes up and his vision is bad again. Many years later, reflecting on this, Tobias Wolff said, I had to realize that of course I wanted to see well, but I didn't want the miracle, because if that miracle were true, I would have had to have changed my life in ways I didn't want to do. I think that's such an important story, because a lot of us like to tell ourselves, if I saw a miracle or some proof of God's existence, then I would believe. No, not necessarily. Your will has a lot to do with accepting with telling your brain what it will accept and admit as true or not.
Wow. Well, Rod Dreher, thank you so much for talking. I sincerely appreciate it. Where can people find your work?
Well, I write a daily Substack, Rod Dreher's Diary. You can find it at roddreher.substack.com. I'm on Twitter at Rod Dreher and
Dreher.
Dreher, RODDREHER. I also contribute to the Free Press and to the European Conservative. And I'm always writing books. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
And thank you, man. We have very different philosophical and religious views, but you're one of the good guys. I've admired you for a long time because you're courageous. One of the things I learned, Peter, from talking to the people who stood up to communist totalitarianism is the thing that matters most when you're faced with that sort of thing is not does somebody share my religious or political views, but does this person share my courage? And you're a courageous guy. That's why I consider you an ally, even though
I consider you a friend, so I appreciate that. And I definitely value our friendship. And I think those differences actually make it super interesting. Our conversation super
For sure.
interesting. So
Thank you,
thanks,
man.
Rod. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks.